Good evening, everyone. I'm going to ask you if you'd be kind enough to migrate towards your tables and take a chair and settle in for what we hope will be a really inspiring hour and a half of your time. My name is Kate Power, and I'm privileged to be standing before you as the Executive Director and CEO of Links2Care, and this is our first community collaboration event, and we are thrilled that you are here to share that with us. So thank you so much for coming. One housekeeping item that I just wanted to make sure, well, a couple actually. Please help yourself to food throughout the evening. It's here for your enjoyment and to sustain you through the evening. And the washrooms are outside the doors to the end of the small corridor and to your right. So that should take care of the important stuff. I'm going to yield the microphone right now and invite Maureen McAllister, Links2Care Board Chair, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Kate. Is that good now? All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm honored to be the new chair of the Board of Directors of Links2Care. I'm looking forward to working with the board and CEO, continuing to strengthen this outstanding agency. This organization has a sound financial record, and as past chair, I'm leaving it in good hands with the new board audit and finance committee. Our board of directors are all volunteer, dedicating their time and expertise to help guide our organization, and I'm pleased to present them to you now. Please stand when your name is called. Jeannie Collins-Arden, past chair. Tracey McKinley, secretary. Don Benoit, treasurer. Cindy Doucette. Sarika Gunda. Jim Meditos. Where is he? Oh, there you go. David Hammond. Matthew Rempel. And Tina DeBow. Thank you. I'd like to a special thanks to Jeannie, who has been our chair for the last years and has guided this organization to where the organization is today. Please join me in a special thanks to Jeannie. On behalf of our entire board, I wish to thank the entire staff of Links2Care for their outstanding work during the past year. We also want to thank our dedicated over 300 volunteers, our funders, and our community partners. Together, we made a positive difference in the lives of 9,000 clients this year, and we have another exciting year to go. Thank you, and now back to Kate.
So as I look around the room, I see a lot of folks that I know, some new faces, which we welcome warmly. But ultimately today is about celebrating collaboration, and we're going to do that by starting off with a really unique opportunity to meet a very special woman. And the person who's going to help us discover some more about Pearl Cameron is our own board secretary, Tracey McKinley. And I'd just like to give you a slice of life of Tracey McKinley. And Tracey's a veteran marketing executive and magazine publishing expert with over 25 years of diverse experience in launching, leading, and marketing national magazine brands. In addition to volunteering with us, and we're thrilled to have her, Tracey is a committed Links2Care friendly visitor and has also participated in numerous other volunteer capacities within Rogers, the magazine industry, and nonprofit organizations. So suffice it to say, this is a very eclectic person who we're going to be, who's going to be guiding us through a discovery interview with a lovely woman. And I'll invite Tracey to come up and tell us more about her.
to sit down and do this Oprah style. So is there another microphone? Thank you. Are you okay with that? Great. Okay, thank you. You all set? You comfortable?
Yeah.
Great, good. We're just going to start. We'll do that after. We'll do that after. Okay, sorry. So we're going to get underway. I've been pleased to be a friendly visitor with this very special lady, Pearl Cameron. I'm part of the friendly visiting program at Links2Care. Pearl Cameron has been my friend who I visit for almost 3 years now. And she also has taken advantage of other Links2Care services as well, including the home help program and some other programs. So normally I visit Pearl on Thursdays, and this happens to be a Thursday. And normally we would talk about politics and current events and life and all kinds of stuff, right? But today we happen to be visiting with about, I don't know, 80 people along with us. So I'm really happy, though, today to have a chance to share with you what I've come to know of Pearl's life. And she's quite a remarkable woman. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to basically interview Pearl, and we're going to show you some pictures as we go and so on. So we'll start with a little background. Pearl Cameron was born in Panama. She was born to parents who were originally from British Guiana. She moved to Trinidad when she was 7. This is what you see on the picture up on the screen is Pearl. Sorry, if you could go back one, Mark. I was just going to say Pearl with her 2 dogs, Dante and Bijou, also known as the greeting committee when I go visit. Right, Pearl?
That's
yes.
right.
So Pearl moved to Trinidad when she was about 7. And I want to start by asking you, Pearl, what was it like growing up in Trinidad?
It was wonderful. It's the largest island in the Caribbean, also the wealthiest. And the way of life was easy going, full of fun and laughter, and it was remarkable. In those days, I can't say the same for this era.
So I'm going to show, I'll ask Mark to go to the next slide. We're going to show now the picture, or rather the front, of an insert about Trinidad that was in the New York Times in 1967. So one of the things about this insert is that it shows a lot of the diversity of Trinidad. And very especially in the top right corner, there's a picture of 4 children who show the diversity of Trinidad. And that's one of the points that you've made to me.
Yes.
And is there anyone special in that picture, Pearl?
Yes, there's my son. Did you say it's on the,
Yeah,
on the left?
he's on the, the little boy on the far left is John Frederick Cameron, who is Pearl's son.
Yeah.
And I guess when you think about the fact that this was in the New York Times in 1967, and when we think about what was going on in America in the 60s, the height of the civil rights movement, it's really quite a remarkable thing to see.
It is. And I did forget to mention, as Tracey said, it's a very, what they call a multicultural community. No bars held. Nobody's better than the other. And it wasn't forced upon you the way it is here. And we like to think we have a multicultural community, but it's quite different to what I knew in Trinidad.
Thank you. Yeah. So after growing up, Pearl became a journalist, and there's a picture of her here up on the screen as a young woman. Pearl was a newspaper writer, a TV commentator, and a magazine editor. and that's a picture of her during that time. And I wonder, Pearl, could you share some of your special memories of your career as a journalist?
Oh, yes. I remember when I first arrived at the newspaper office, I was given a beautiful, clean desk and pencils and paper, and I was wondering, what on earth am I going to write about? Because nobody was telling you anything. I did not even meet a reporter or the editor. So finally somebody walked in, and he was the editor, and he did say to me, "What would you like to write about?" And I really was lost. But then I thought, I'd like to write about, I like little boys. Now, I couldn't say that today, okay? But so he said, okay, go ahead, do what you can. And I did write the fact. That was because I think I had spent a year in the boys' school teaching little boys, and I found them very interesting. So I was glad that I had a boy when I had one. What else?
Okay. I think we can go to the next picture, because there's a picture of Pearl interviewing the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yeah.
But I really want to know, the lady in the middle in that picture, what was going on that caused that lady to have such a shocked look on her face? Look at that woman. What was happening, Pearl?
You see, in those days, you didn't ask royalty questions. You stood like a deaf mute and be very faceless, okay? But that was not my personality. So I was asking him all sorts of questions, one being, why did he speak about the cars in Trinidad, which when a car is old, you don't take it to a shop or get rid of it. You put it in a cane field, okay? So there are lots of cane fields with cane sprouting out of a car. And this prince, would like all those cars removed before the Queen arrived. And that wasn't going to happen, okay? So this poor aide-de-camp, she couldn't shut me up. She couldn't get me up. So that's why her expression tells a story.
It surely does. So Pearl was also involved in the business world in Trinidad, and she became the first female member of the Trinidad Junior Chamber of Commerce. And we now have a picture up on the slide when that group visited Barbados, and you'll notice a certain gender bias happening in that group, and you'll notice someone right in the middle, and that's our dear Pearl. So Pearl, how did that come about?
Okay, I was a director in my father's business, and that was the only qualification necessary to join the Chamber of Commerce. So I sent in an application, and I waited and waited and waited. Finally, I got tired of waiting, and their meetings were held on a Tuesday afternoon. So I decided, okay, I'm going to that meeting. So I got to the meeting, I knocked on the door, and a voice said, enter. Now, I thought I was going to enter a corridor, but no way. I entered the room where the meeting was taking place. And of course, in those wonderful days, all these men stood up. Those were the gracious days, okay? And the president was startled. Now, as I said, it's a multicultural country, and he is a white guy. Well, he blanched. He turned purple. He turned red because he didn't know what to do. And I said to him, his name was Conrad. I said, Conrad, why do I have to wait 3 months before you respond to my application? Well, I'm here, and I'm here to stay. And of course, one of the young men got up and gave me a chair, and that was it.
Yeah, there you go. On to Barbados. It was great. So after Pearl's next move was she moved to New York City, where she worked in tourism, in the tourism office of Trinidad and Tobago. And after 3 years of that or so, she was thinking of moving to England, but ultimately decided to come to Canada. And I wonder if you can tell us what made you change your mind to come to Canada.
Now, this is the best part, okay? I had luncheon with one of the ambassadors, at the end of which he handed me an envelope, and he said to me, I do not wish you to open this until you've put your son to bed. And I thought, okay, I'll do that. So when I did open it, it was 1968, The Just Society, okay, by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And I thought, this is where I belong. And I came here, and I've been here since, and I have never looked back. I've gone back twice to the Caribbean, but this was home and is home. And I don't feel like a multicultural person. I'm just an individual, okay?
Thank you. So, living in Toronto, Pearl worked in public relations for many years. After some exploring around, she moved to Burlington and began a career in real estate. So during those years, Pearl also ran to become a member of the provincial parliament for the Liberal Party. So she had quite an active career. After her busy career and raising her son, John Frederick, Pearl retired to Oakville. She's had a very active retirement. She's been involved with her church and with politics, among many things. And her interest in seniors care was really sparked during her time as an MPP candidate. So I want to show you now an example of Pearl's leisurely retirement. If you can go to the next slide. This is a picture of an article that was in the Oakville Beaver last year around this time. This time last year, Pearl organized the Oakville Seniors Forum, which was held in the Oakville Town Hall. There were a panel of 5 speakers, including CCAC CEO Carolyn LeBreton, CNIB National President John Rafferty, and 3 others. And it was in a very extensive and well-attended forum to talk about seniors' issues. So, Pearl, I wanted to ask, what made you decide that there was a need for such a forum?
Well, maybe I'm the only senior in the room, I hope so. But it's unfortunate how inadequate, how uncaring are some of the people who are there to look after seniors. What was happening they were not treated with any deliberate abuse, but there was no compassion. I got so many calls from different people telling me about what was going on in seniors' homes. And I felt that if nothing was done, it would become worse. So I decided to try and get a forum going. And I did.
And I know some of the issues that were brought up in the forum, you had mentioned to me that you felt that seniors sometimes were afraid to speak up for themselves in fear of losing their care.
Yeah.
What were some of the were there other things that came out?
Well, you see, there was a couple there. No, not the couple, just the wife. And she was in tears because of the way, or lack of respect, or lack of compassion that the PSW was treating her husband. And this made the panel realize that everything was not as well planned or well laid out for the senior care. So, you know, and then there were others who would call in after the forum to mention other cases. And even last night, one call, there's an elderly lady, I think she's in her 90s, and she has lost a leg, and her time is cut. She had 2 hours help, now it's only 1 hour. And now she's having difficulty with her nephew, who is, what do you call those? Power of attorney. Power of attorney. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to take away her apartment from her. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of difficulties out there for seniors. Mm-hmm. And we should be aware that it's not easy.
And you've mentioned, I'll just add a couple, you've mentioned to me as well that sometimes people feel as though they're treated as a number.
Oh, yes.
And that sometimes more training would be appropriate.
Well, the thing is, we are treated as numbers. And if I may, please, I'd like to say at this point that Tracey is the first person that I'm aware of who has been able to think outside of the box. What I mean by that is, I'm a senior, and she recognized the fact that I was once a young woman, and she wanted to know about me as she's explaining. And I thought, you know, this is great. Here is an organization that is willing to realize that seniors have something to say. We all had a life. Maybe some exciting, maybe not. I don't know what mine does, but you know, I'm here, and I'm hoping that by her example and that of Links2Care, that other organizations would have other seniors come to their meetings and speak to them, because each one of us could give you a story.
Everyone has a story. Thank you,
Yeah.
Pearl. So in closing, you've done a lot of living, and I wonder if you could just share with us in closing, I can't resist this bad pun, your pearls of wisdom. Pearls of wisdom, please.
Well, I would like to say to Links2Care, because you're now getting in, or you're now in getting PSWs to, aren't you? Yep. So what you should be doing is compassionate caring. It doesn't happen. Look, we are numbers. We all feel like a number. I'm not a number. There's some of us who resent being treated like numbers. But the organizations do not realize that they're treating us as numbers. So,
Thank you, Pearl. Any closing advice for us as we, life advice?
life advice.
Life advice.
Seize every opportunity you have to take care and speak up on behalf of seniors and others, because there are lots of young people in homes who are also in the same predicament. And our healthcare system is not what it is called to be. It is not. Okay?
Thank you,
Now-
Pearl.
Now, may
I hope you enjoyed as much as I did getting to know Pearl Cameron, who, as we say on the slide, trailblazer, professional, activist, mother, and friend. Thank you, Pearl.
May I just have the last word?
They never would have guessed.
No. You know, what Links2Care has done, it's really wonderful. And I wish to thank them for allowing Tracey, who has seen that maybe I could make you laugh, or maybe you would go home thinking, who the devil is that woman? You know, anything. But I do thank the organization, and I do hope that other organizations will do the same for other seniors. Give us a break. I'm feeling young tonight because I feel as if I've gone back in time. So thank you very, very much.
Wow, how was that, huh? It's nothing like hearing it like it is. Pearl, you are an inspiration, and your candor it serves you very well. Thank you for the kind words for Links2Care. This was not meant to be an advertorial. We really love this. We didn't know Pearl was going to say that. But we appreciate that you said that. But most importantly, we often talk in healthcare about hearing the voice of the consumer. And you just told us, as somebody who receives services, that there's room for improvement. And we're all works in progress, so thank you for that nudge. Thank you for encouraging us to do better. There is some common ground between Pearl and our next speaker. And before I invite Jeannie to come up and introduce our featured speaker tonight, a lot of it has to do, one of the things that I think Pearl and Dr. Nowaczynski have in common is they're both what I describe as doers. They have thoughts about how things can and might be, or maybe even should be, and they don't just sit there and ruminate and think, well, ain't it awful that it isn't that way? They actually get something done about it. It is inspiring, and if if we allowed you to feel a little younger tonight, I think you ignited us to do a little bit better, and I think we're going to get stirred up even a bit more. So Jeannie, without further ado, would you mind coming up and introducing Dr. Nowaczynski?
Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm going to walk around, and I'm going to not stand behind the podium because you won't even see me if I'm back there. So I'm Jeannie Collins-Ardern. This is my first official act as past chair of the board. And I'm having a little bit of trouble letting go, so you'll have to excuse me. I'm here this evening to introduce Dr. Mark Nowaczynski to you. He's a very unique individual, and as Kate mentioned, he is a doer and has made a real difference to our healthcare system, particularly for seniors. Dr. Nowaczynski started his family medicine practice in 1992, and most of us will remember back in the 90s where a lot of changes happened in the healthcare system, and a lot of specialized care and home care actually was shut down at that time. So what Dr. Mark, as he's often called, realized was that a lot of his seniors patients were losing services that they had previously enjoyed, and that fewer and fewer doctors were willing to make house calls because they make about a quarter of the amount of money that they make if they have appointments in their offices. So he continued to do house calls because he realized that if he didn't, a lot of his senior clients were at risk of having no health care at all. And so actually in 2007, he closed his offices and concentrated fully on house calls. Also in 2007, he started a pilot project called House Calls and was given funds for that by the government. And by 2009, in the words of the government, he had shown that house calls was an evidence-based, cost-effective strategy to support aging at home. And in 2009, they received permanent funding from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And any of you who are familiar with Dr. Sinha at Mount Sinai and the work that he has done in terms of the aging at home strategy, Dr. Mark was instrumental in that and collaborated with that project, and the goals are pretty much the same. So one of the other things that's unique about House Calls is that it's based in a not-for-profit Toronto community support agency, as opposed to a traditional doctor's office. Physician-led, Dr. Mark is the director of care, but it includes occupational therapists, physiotherapists, nurse practitioners, social workers, coordinators, everything required to help people stay in their own homes and be independent, resilient, and maximize their well-being. Basically, this population has been called frail, vulnerable, and marginalized. And for many seniors, that is in fact the case, and they often get shoved into a hospital because there isn't sufficient home care available. And as Dr. Sinha has said, for every time a senior is in the hospital for 1 week, they lose 10% of their muscle mass, and they lose functionability. So what we need to do is hospitalize when required, absolutely, but get these people back into their homes, get them independent, get them resilient. This is where they want to be, this is where they should be, this is where they can be with appropriate care at home. And his practice is providing that care along the full spectrum, from doctor services, some in-home medical testing, right through social needs with their social worker, and making sure that everybody is connected to the services that they need best. So, as well as being a doctor, Dr. Mark is also an accomplished photographer. And when he started doing full-time house calls, he started photographing his patients and actually had a full exhibition at the Royal Ontario Museum in 2010 called House Calls with My Camera. And it was very illuminating for people to see these seniors who were marginalized by our society. In addition to that, a documentary was made of Dr. Mark and his work. And it was done by the National Film Board, and it won a Gemini Award. So as well as photographing and running this House Calls network, in addition, Dr. Mark is an assistant professor of the Department of Family and Community Medicine at U of T, and he's actively involved in teaching, training, and program development. So we would like to express our thanks for Dr. Mark to coming to see us tonight and to tell us a little bit more about House Calls, which has been an inspiration and a catalyst for change and how Ontario healthcare system serves this growing need of customers.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction. Can I use this?
I think so. If you turn it up, yeah.
I'm going to talk about the home-based primary care of seniors. And I'll start off by saying I have a very biased perspective. I do this sort of work full-time, and I feel very strongly and passionately about this. So I'm going to talk to you about how this home-based primary care program came about and how using photography inadvertently made it all happen. And you will see a lot of photographs. I'm not going to have time to speak about most of the photographs, but almost all of the black and white photographs that you're going to see, except for some historical ones, are ones that I've taken of my practice. I'm going to make the case for providing more of this type of care, and I'll take you on some house calls, and I'll show you how you do a house call. And I promise to go off on tangents. Well, Ontario politics played a big role in this story. We had, from 1995 to 2003, the so-called common sense revolution, during which there were massive cuts to chronic supportive home care services for seniors. There was a huge investment made in new long-term care beds, and they were initially filled by denying home care to seniors. So a lot of seniors ended up in long-term care that didn't need to be there, which meant that our long-term care system became overwhelmed. It became a no-vacancy long-term care system. And since 2003, under the successive Liberal governments, there has been a focus on aging at home. And where we're heading, it's hard to say. Bruce Leff, a great proponent of geriatric care in the United States, a great geriatrician, said in a healthcare system that is becoming increasingly fragmented, home care can help bridge gaps in the continuum of care. And Marcus Hollander, who's a Canadian healthcare economist based in British Columbia, said that long-term home care may in fact be an important part of the solution to making our overall healthcare system more efficient and effective and enhancing its value for money. So we know it's good fiscal sense and it's what people want. But the option of aging in place requires a robust chronic supportive home care system. Home care is not covered by the Canada Health Act. So we have a patchwork of systems across the country. And in Ontario, home and community care have been chronically underfunded. Home care represents only less than 5% of our healthcare budget. It should be a lot more than that. So as a photographer, I can tell you a tripod needs 3 strong pillars, and the Canada Health Act gave us 2 strong pillars, hospital care and physician services. And the third pillar that we need is home care, home-based primary care, and all of that would be very much a part of a national senior strategy, which is currently being worked on and advocated for. The government of Ontario introduced an aging at home strategy in 2007, which was a 4-year, $1.1 billion initiative that would, quote, transform community health care services so that seniors can live healthy, independent lives in their own homes. This sounded like, you know, pennies from heaven, buckets of them. But we had a problem with emergency room crowding and ALC beds, you know, seniors clogging up acute care wards. And so money was shifted downstream. And so the aging at home strategy became increasingly focused on downstream hospital care, ER wait times, and the ALC crisis. So it became a reactive initiative rather than a preventative one. And what the system needed was more upstream investment in services and care for seniors in the community that would decrease, delay, and prevent the 911 calls that led to ER visits and hospital admissions and readmissions and premature placements into long-term care. And unfortunately, a great opportunity was missed. We think of house calls, the doctor's house call, as belonging to a bygone era. And you see from Eugene Smith's very wonderful photo essay from 1948 called Country Doctor. I remember thumbing through old issues of Life magazine and seeing that and being inspired by it. And back in 2007, the Globe and Mail called this old school doctors. But there's nothing old school about this young family practice resident doing a home visit. And physician house calls used to be very commonplace. In the 1930s, 40% of all doctor-patient encounters were house calls. And by 1980, that had dwindled to a fraction of a percent and continued to drop through the 1990s at a time when the home care sector was rapidly expanding. And home care is right now the fastest growing healthcare sector, and this tells you that the medical community is disconnected from home care, and that's something that really has to change. So why don't doctors do home visits? And it has a lot to do with healthcare delivery and training having become very centralized, the advent of the general hospital. Primary care delivery is largely office-based, and there's simply a lack of training and exposure to home-based care. There are not enough role models and mentors. There are just not enough doctors doing home visits to offer enough training to enough physicians in training. And there's a lack of financial incentives. You lose money by doing something that is more time-consuming and requires travel. So we need other funding models than the sort of piecework, fee-for-service model. Do you know who the highest paid family doctors are? Doctors in walk-in clinics. And is that where you get the best care? Where you get continuity of care, comprehensive care? No. They reward volume, not quality. So we have two conflicting challenges. We have a growing number of housebound patients and a majority of physicians that are office-bound. And I think being office-bound is a problem that's easier to solve than the housebound issue. So why is home-based care important? Well, seniors, as they age, develop frailty and may reach a point where they're unable to attend doctor's office visits, and they get lost to follow-up. And they end up bouncing in and out of emergency departments because the only access to medical care is by calling 911. And that leads to more hospital admissions and readmissions, more prolonged hospital stays, and an increased risk of ending up prematurely in a nursing home. So providing care at home and home care are highly preventative and cost-effective. So why should we care? Well, we should care because we are facing what we keep hearing, this demographic tsunami. There are about 1.5 million Canadians over the age of 80. This is one of the most rapidly growing segments of the population. And what's important to keep in mind is the majority of Canadians over the age of 80 are going to live out their days at home outside of institutional care. We have, I think, something like 70,000 long-term care beds in Ontario. So that tells you that the vast majority of seniors are not going to end up in a nursing home. Over the next 2 decades, the number of Canadians over the age of 65 will double, and the number over 85 will quadruple. And for healthcare planners, that must instill fear. So there are going to be a lot more people like Betty cutting into their 100th birthday cake. And by the way, if you order a cake at Loblaws and you ask, happy birthday, Betty, happy 100th birthday, Betty, 100th birthday, no charge. You get a free cake. So, you can smudge the number, So here's a very interesting graph. This is Canada's population between 1950 and 2050. And the blue line represents the percentage of the population under the age of 15. And the red line, the percentage of the population over the age of 60. And if you look in 1960, there's a huge blip. Well, 1960 was the peak of the baby boom. So the baby boomers, as we go forward to 2020, well, they make that red line go up. So we are seeing a reversal of what we had in 1960. Now we're going to have a lot more seniors than young people, and our healthcare system has unfortunately not evolved to meet that demographic change. Our universal healthcare system was designed 50 years ago, when the average Canadian was 27 years of age. Today, the average Canadian is 47 years of age. And our healthcare system was simply not designed to serve an aging population. If you show up, if you're 25 years old and you have appendicitis and you get admitted to hospital, great. Our system's superb at taking care of that. But if you are an 87-year-old cognitively impaired senior with 6 major comorbidities, and you show up in the emergency department confused, delirious, and sick, it's a disaster. We have this ALC problem across the country. ALC patients are what we call alternate level of care, is the euphemism for what we used to call bed blockers. So those are people who are occupying an acute care hospital bed who no longer need to be in that hospital bed, but there is nowhere else to send them. And on any given day in Canada, 15% of acute care hospital beds are occupied by ALC patients. And the Canadian Medical Association estimated that that's costing our healthcare system $2.3 billion a year to warehouse seniors in acute care hospitals. It's cheaper to put somebody up at the Four Seasons with room service than to keep them in hospital. So 2.3 billion, that's very close to the Ontario's home care budget, which is 2.4 billion. So we're wasting an entire province's home care budget warehousing seniors in hospital. So a hospital bed costs $1,000 a day. A long-term care bed costs $130 a day. And home care costs $55 a day. Wow, math looks really simple to me here. So today, 14% of Canadians are over the age of 65, and they consume almost half of public health care spending. And by 2036, if we just continue doing things the way we're doing them, seniors will comprise 25% of the population and consume almost 2/3 of healthcare spending. So that tells you that our current system is not sustainable. This is a poster that I got in the mail yesterday. It's meant to go in my waiting room, but I don't have a waiting room. So it's a poster that's about 3 feet long. And it came from the Canadian Medical Association. It came with the September issue of the CMAJ, the Canadian Medical Association Journal. Goes to every single Canadian physician. And the CMA is trying to make the issue of developing a national senior strategy, that is sort of their main focus in this federal election campaign. We hear so little about healthcare. I've heard very little about healthcare during this campaign, and I've watched 2 of the debates. It was hard. But healthcare was really not an issue. So what are the consequences of all of this? Well, we will have a growing population of seniors whose needs will not be met by our current typical office-based primary care delivery. Our hospitals will be overwhelmed. There will be greater demand for home care and long-term care. And the focus of healthcare delivery will have to shift from hospital into the home. We're going to need a lot more home care, a lot more home-based primary care, interprofessional care, and specialty care that goes into the home. And that's Dr. Samir Sinha, who's the Director of Geriatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital. We work very closely together. He does consults on our team. And he was the architect of Ontario's senior strategy. So how does one go about stimulating change? Well, increasing awareness is a critical step on the road to sustainable solutions. And photography has a venerable history as a tool for social change. Lewis Hine was a school teacher in the early 1900s who helped the movement to abolish child labor in the United States, and he photographed children in factories and mines, and that helped usher bills through Congress very quickly once photographs started to circulate. I mean, it's kind of sad to see an 8-year-old operating a cotton gin. During the Depression, an agency of the federal government in the US hired a team of photographers to photograph the devastation that was occurring to help publicize the needed reforms of Roosevelt's New Deal. Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans being 2 of the most notable whose photographs are here. And the image in the middle, Migrant Mother, was taken in 1936, and it's probably one of the most reproduced images of the 20th century and one of the most recognized. And Eugene Smith, there's his essay, Country Doctor, he photographed for Life magazine many photo essays that showed a passionate commitment that defined photography's great power for betterment and understanding. And the photograph on the very right, he was the photographer who actually risked his life to document the mercury poisoning in Minamata Bay. And that is a mother bathing her child who has Minamata's disease, a degenerative neurological condition caused by mercury poisoning. And a large Japanese chemical conglomerate was pumping mercury into a bay that the local village of Minamata, they did all their fishing in that bay and were being poisoned. And it led to a series of lawsuits and so Dorothea Lang, the documentary photographer that took that portrait of migrant mother, said that only through the interested work of amateurs who chose themes and followed them can documentation by the camera of our age and our complex society be intimate, pervasive, and adequate. And that struck a chord with me. And John Sharkovsky, who was curator of photography at MoMA, said, among photographers also, most of those who have produced the medium's memorable work have dealt with issues from their everyday lives, subject matter that they have known well. In other words, photograph what you have access to, what you know. And June Callwood said at her last public appearance in 2007, if you see an injustice being committed, you aren't an observer, you are a participant. So I began photographing my patients back in the dark days of the Harris-Eves common sense revolution. A lot of my patients were losing home care services, and I didn't know how to fight back, but I knew I could document the issue. And I gave a seminar at U of T in 2002 and showed the photographs, and a few weeks later, a 3-page photo essay appeared in the Globe and Mail, and it was the Saturday of the Mother's Day weekend. And this generated a lot of interest in this whole issue and led to the project being profiled in national print, radio, and television media, led to the making of a National Film Board documentary, and led to many opportunities to speak about the issue. And in 2010, we were very fortunate to be able to depict our program in an exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum that ran for 14 months. And the director of the museum told me, Mark, 100,000 people walk through that room every month. So over 1 million people saw the exhibit. Now, you have to walk through that room to get to the dinosaur exhibit, which is the most visited room in the museum. So I stood there and sometimes watched, people just walk through the gallery without even noticing that there were any photographs on the wall. But every now and then you'd see somebody stop and they'd get distracted. So has this advocacy had any impact? And so I'm going to give you a very quick example of social documentary photography still playing a role in stimulating change. That was the Glenn Gould studio in 2006, and that's Andy Barry, who was the host of Metro Morning for many years, the CBC radio program, a morning current affairs program. And he saw the film HouseCalls, and he decided to hold a screening, followed by a town hall discussion, and then create a series of radio programs about the whole issue of the need to care for seniors at home. And he called it Keeping Dignity Alive, the struggle to support seniors in their own homes. And they created a very nice website with audio clips and photographs. And he then became very engaged in the issue. And the following year, this would have been about 6 months before the Aging at Home strategy was announced. There was a report released on emergency room wait times, and then Health Minister George Smitherman said the answer to relieving the strain on hospital emergency rooms is to create a healthcare system with more resources in the community. He said he would like to see more care delivered to the elderly in their homes so they can remain independent longer. And I was reading the Globe and Mail and making breakfast for my children before taking them to school. And the phone rang, and it was a CBC producer who said, Andy was wondering if you could, talk on Metro Morning in about 20 minutes about this article. And so the kids were late for school, and I spoke on the radio, and we spoke about the whole issue of home-based care of frail seniors, and I mentioned how it would be wonderful to work with an interdisciplinary team of nurses, social workers, and occupational therapists. Because at that time I was doing this all by myself. And a few days later, I was contacted by Carol Annette, who's the CEO of VHA Home Health Care, a large not-for-profit provider of home care and home care nursing services, and she offered, VHA would be pleased to partner with you, others in the future, particularly our nurses could be of good use and integrated into ongoing care. And the next day, I get an email from the CEO of Coda Health, Trish Barbado. So Coda Health provided at one point all of the occupational therapy services for the Toronto Central CCAC. And she said, I would like to discuss the possibility of our therapists assisting you in some way. I already had a long-standing relationship with a community support services agency in North Toronto called Sprint. It's now called Sprint Senior Care. So Sprint stands for Senior People Resources in North Toronto, but they've rebranded to Sprint Senior Care. And I went to the executive director and I said, what do you think of the idea of a multi-agency collaboration? And we met, and very quickly, because the decision makers were at the table, very quickly sketched out a pilot project. They would donate 2 days a week for 2 years, 1 OT, 1 nurse, and a social worker. And that's when I said, okay, and I will close my office practice and do this full time. And that's how it started. And so the funding was just in kind. There were no dollars associated with this. And just as we were getting ready to get off the ground, the government announced the Aging at Home strategy. So we applied for funding, but we were turned down in the first year. So we got funded in the second year, in 2009. But as a result of starting all of this, it drew the attention of Judy Steed, who was a Toronto Star reporter who won the Atkinson Fellowship and did this beautiful series on aging, and she spent a day doing home visits and was very intrigued by this whole model of care and wrote a lovely article. And so we got funding in 2009 for an interdisciplinary mobile team serving frail seniors, and it was a physician-led team based in a community support services agency, which is kind of a unique model, a unique partnership, but it makes a lot of sense. And what we do is HouseCalls, which is what we call our program, provides ongoing, comprehensive, interdisciplinary, home-based primary care to frail, marginalized, cognitively impaired, and housebound seniors who would not otherwise have access to primary care. So we always ask ourselves when we receive a referral, is this a necessity and not just a convenience? And by being embedded in a community support services agency, we have access to and the expertise of people who can add a comprehensive basket of services to be integrated with primary care delivery. You all remember MASH. Well, MASH and what we do have something in common, have a lot in common, right? So HouseCalls are low tech and high touch. They adhere to the KISS principle. Keep it simple, Sally, stupid, Home-based primary care is not unlike the 407-7th MASH approach to surgery. It's a team effort, it's close to the front. You diagnose and treat based on your history and physical exam. You're not doing a lot of investigations in the home. You have to be a good clinician and, make the diagnosis clinically and treat it. because investigations are limited. You're not sending your patients to ER just because, oh, I'm not sure if those crackles in the chest are pneumonia, we better do a chest x-ray just to be sure. No, if the patient is having trouble breathing, they're coughing, their respiratory rate is elevated, and they have dullness when you percuss, you know, you do this, doctors don't do this anymore, and their crackles, well, yes, they do have pneumonia. They're a population at risk of having pneumonia, so let's treat them for pneumonia, and lo and behold, they get better and don't deteriorate and require a hospitalization. So early intervention prevents the deteriorations that result in admissions and readmissions. And that was very much the MASH model of care. You know, get them into the OR at the front, do meatball surgery, and that's exactly what they called it. And their battlefield death rate plummeted compared to World War II. And our team has grown, and, you know, like MASH, we're a little bit zany. So who are our patients? Our patients are hard to categorize because it's a very heterogeneous group who are medically, cognitively, and socially fragile, and whose needs are not well served by traditional office-based primary care delivery. So the term housebound, I hate the term housebound, because the term housebound, you sort of think, oh, that's someone who can't leave their house. But what about someone who's cognitively impaired? They've been living in the same apartment for 40 years, and they know where the store is, they know where the bank is, they have no idea what day of the week it is, because they don't remember, so they don't know how to dial a telephone number. So how can they keep a medical appointment unless they have someone who can take them? But if they don't have anybody to take them, so they're cognitively impaired, and they don't have social supports, well, they have the same difficulty in accessing primary care as someone who's bedbound, right? Nobody agrees? No. So if you draw 3 circles that each represent medical frailty, cognitive frailty, and social frailty, if you fall into 2 or more categories, you would benefit from home-based care. So we started our funding with a social worker full-time, an occupational therapist full-time, a nurse practitioner, and a physician. And remember that PSWs are your eyes and ears. They see things, they see our patients every day, or 3 times a week, or twice a week. And they can alert us to changes in people's baseline. And our team now has grown. We've attracted now a total of, we're now a total of 4 physicians. We got some charitable dollars that allowed us to hire another occupational therapist, add a physiotherapist. We're working with Toronto EMS and got some funding from the ministry for a pilot program to embed a community paramedic on the team, and CCAC liaison coordinator attends part of our rounds every week so that we can communicate better, because with our caseload, we have 50 CCAC case managers associated with our caseload, and so it's very difficult for us to interact with 50 different case managers. So our program has enrolled over 1,000 patients since its inception. We carry now a caseload of 300. In our first year, we carried a caseload of 80. And our goal was to take care of 135 a year. Well, now we take care of 500 patients a year with an average age of 87. 40% of our patients come from hospital. They tend to have multiple comorbidities, which is a medical way of saying they've got more than one major medical condition. We have a high rate of attrition. We now do, between the doctors and nurse practitioner, we do 5,000 medical home visits a year. And if we add up everybody else, we're somewhere in the 8,000 to 10,000 total home visits per year. So we're small but very active. And when I say attrition from our program, we only have two endpoints, two significant endpoints, and they both constantly remind us of our mortality. And one endpoint is if someone is admitted to a long-term care facility or a retirement residence, they have access to care there, so we don't follow them. And death is the other point of attrition, and we palliate our own patients. We provide a lot of end-of-life care. So what evidence is there to support this model of care? We did a study of 150 patients that were enrolled into HouseCalls following an index acute care hospitalization. So these patients had an average age of 87, and 125 of those 150 were active in the program for more than 90 days. And for that cohort, we saw 53% fewer hospital admissions per year following admission into the program. Some were, of course, admitted to hospital, but we saw a reduction, a 67% annual reduction in days in hospital. So if they were readmitted, they were readmitted for a shorter stay. And with that reduction in hospital bed days, we reduced hospital costs by $17,000 per patient per year. And the total cost of our program per patient is $2,600 a year. That's pretty good. So the other 25 patients that weren't active in the program for 90 days, well, 2/3 of those people died, and half of those deaths occurred at home. And what's kind of startling is the non-institutional death rate in Ontario is 20%. So that means 80% of people who die in Ontario either die in a hospital or a long-term care facility. Only 20% of people die at home. So as I mentioned, the cost of combined interprofessional medical care provided by HouseCalls is $2,600 per patient per year. We guesstimate, it's very, very hard to actually come up with a number, but we think we save somewhere between $5 and $10 million a year in hospital and institutional care. So to put it another way, hundreds of thousands of dollars of home-based primary care prevents millions of dollars in hospital and institutional care. We do a lot of teaching and training in all the disciplines involved in the team. We've had hundreds of family practice residents do rotations with us, and several of those former family medicine residents are now providing ongoing home-based geriatric primary care in their own practices, and 3 of those former residents are now members of the team. So how are HouseCalls done? Well, you're all familiar with what happens when you go to a doctor's office and you go into a typical examining room. But what happens when a doctor does a house call? Well, you've got to take your examining room with you in your bag, and I carry very little equipment. So a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, a larger cuff, an otoscope for looking in ears, and a pen light. And iPhone is a good pen light too. I have a computer for my electronic medical record, and prescriptions, lab recs, CCAC referrals for wound care and whatnot. Do not resuscitate forms, and on the very right are death certificates, medical certificates of death. Because you're not dead in Ontario till a doctor pronounces you dead, and we unfortunately have to do that. And the important thing when you're doing a house call is what's very different from a visit to the office is when a patient comes to the office, you're just looking at the patient. But when you go to the patient's home, you're looking at their whole environment, their whole life. And you have to ask yourself more than, what supports are in place? Are there caregivers involved? Do they have family? Do they have neighbors who are involved? Do they have home care services? Do they have a substitute decision maker? And what medications are they on? And what you really want to do is you want to physically look at their pill bottles and or blister packs. So show me what you're actually taking. Because a medication list and what somebody's actually consuming may not be the same, right? So here's Dr. Sinha doing a medication review with Mr. W. And they're, what are you actually taking? How many of these are you taking? When are you taking them? And there's Joe opening up the yogurt container with pill bottles. I'm a very big fan of blister packs because they simplify administration, they increase compliance, and it makes it much easier to monitor compliance, and it makes it very easy to do a medication review. And another very important thing is personal support workers can assist people with taking medication from a blister pack, but not from pill bottles. So that's what a blister pack, that's what the back of a blister pack looks like. And you push the pills through, so you see the line, each line across is a day, and there are 4 time slots per day. And, well, the problem with this is this person's on twice-a-day medications, but she has a PSW visit once a day. So what this blister pack tells you is this person, unless someone helps her with the medication, she's not taking her drugs. So put all the medications together once a day. May not be optimal for all the medications, but it's better to take them at the wrong time of day than to not take them at all. Here's a patient who came out of hospital on a lot of drugs, and she refused to take them. And she was a woman in her 90s with heart disease and congestive heart failure, and she crossed out Health Watch and wrote really Death Watch. So we did some negotiating, and I said, I'm going to take away all of the medications that you don't need to keep breathing. And she agreed with that. I said, you're 94, you have really bad heart disease. I don't really care what your bone density is going to be in 5 years. So let's not worry about bone density, but let's worry about your heart failure. Falls prevention. Hip fractures. Frail seniors who fall and break their hips, 50% are dead within 6 months. So preventing falls is really, really important. And one thing that CCAC can send in are occupational therapists who can make falls risk, do a home safety assessment and convince people to get rid of those little tiny rugs scattered all over that are just tripping hazards. And as part of the house call, of course, you're going to do a physical exam, but you also want to look at, people's mobility, their ability to transfer. Can they stand up? Can they get up and go to the washroom? That's pretty key to staying at home. And are they cognitively impaired or not? And there, Dr. Sinha's doing a cognitive assessment on Barbara. And of course, you've got to examine your surroundings. Is it clean? The sniff test. I can now tell the difference between, when I enter a door, the difference between the smell of cat urine and human urine. And believe me, a lot of people don't let their cats out, and their sense of smell is not very good. So you walk into houses that really smell quite overwhelmingly of cat urine, but sometimes there's no cat. And The other really important thing is to look at the refrigerator, do the fridge biopsy, and where do they sleep, how do they sleep, where's the bathroom, do they have to go upstairs, do they have any equipment, are there stairs, do the stairs have railings, little rugs that I mentioned. You've got to think about falls risks. So are people well cared for? Do they have involved family? Or are they socially isolated and neglected? And this woman lives on chocolate milk, Tostitos, and Special K, which I don't think is a very balanced diet. But, that's what happens when you open the fridge. Uncle Joe, who we call him Uncle Joe because he's was the uncle of a good friend of mine. This man owned 5 houses in East York, 2 properties in Muskoka. On paper, he was a multimillionaire. And, he talks about his sore back. Well, come on. You got this Leon's pull-out couch from the 1980s. And no wonder his back hurts. This woman came to our attention because a neighbor, she lived on the 15th floor of one of the apartment towers at Yonge and Eglinton, and she was knocking on the doors of neighbors begging for food. So someone called a crisis line, and she ended up being referred to our program, and this is what we saw when we went in. This is someone who's not doing well. A lot of mess in the kitchen, and the refrigerator there was no food, there were empty beer cans, there's a brandy bottle. So someone who's not eating, who may have a drinking problem. And there's a bit of a science experiment going on here. A lot of mold and decaying stuff. Our social worker found the mummified remains of a cat on the balcony. So what were the 2 most important things we needed to do for this woman? Can anyone think of something we should have done for her or did for her? First of all, so home care supports. Yeah. Other thing? Excellent. So sometimes the most powerful intervention is to order Meals on Wheels. I can't tell you how important Meals on Wheels are in the community for many seniors. So this is the woman who came back to life with proper nutrition, some home care support. She was cognitively impaired, but physically in pretty good shape. And her apartment shows a past, a woman who read and listened to music and still had a pet bird, which unfortunately flew away. But she had worked as an insurance adjuster, but was very passionate about ballet and had been an extra in ballet productions. And so she was showing the social work student the different, ballet poses. And you see in the bottom right a figure of the Nutcracker. And she showed us a picture of herself as a younger woman. And I figured out that picture was taken in 1973. So that's her in 1973. Does anyone recognize the man sitting next to her? Close? Exactly. Yeah, Rudolf Nureyev, who was one of the greatest dancers of the 20th century. He defected from the Soviet Union in Toronto at the O'Keefe Center. I don't remember which ballet he was doing, but on the last night, last curtain call, he left the stage and went to a waiting car in the alleyway, evaded his KGB minders, and held a press conference in New York City the next day saying he had been accepted for political asylum in the United States. So there she is with Nureyev. So, as Pearl mentioned, people have a past, and they have an interesting past. And we can order blood work in the home, and So as part of the clinical encounter, you come up with a diagnosis, but really with our population, you come up with a problem list. And treatment includes not just medical treatment, but rehabilitation, social supports. You have to think about future care planning, advanced directives, so home care supports, home safety, adult day programs can play an important role for socially isolated and cognitively impaired seniors. Transportation services, community dining programs. These are all things that community support services agencies do and that are accessible and affordable. And house calls are respectful and dignified. I think they're a lovely way to combat ageism. They're a lovely way to advocate for patients and allow one to become a role model for trainees. And they're very satisfying to the provider. You provide care to those who would not otherwise receive care. You really get to know your patients in a way that's very different from an office visit. I mean, I'll never forget one of my first house calls. This very meek, mild, older woman looked at me and said, "Doctor, would you mind taking off your shoes?" Imagine in an office, the power relationship is very different. House calls are very much provider driven. I decide who I'm going to see when, whereas when you're in an office, it's whoever made an appointment to see you is who you see. So one gets to escape the clinic and the worried well. You get to know your city, you improve your parking skills. I can parallel park really well. And you get to do some walking and cycling. All of us on the team, we do some of our house calls on our bicycles. In the last 3 weeks, I've spent more days on my bicycle than I have in my car. I would have cycled today, but Oakville is too far from Yonge and Eglinton. So in May 2010, Mr. W was referred to our program. And doing very well, but having great difficulty getting to his doctor. And I want you to guess how old this man is. Like 86? 90? 101. Yeah. So Mr. W, we took care of him until he was almost 105. He passed away this past January, a month shy of his 105th birthday. And I'll be politically incorrect, but last summer I think it was a very philosophical man, very articulate, very charming. He loved to have the opportunity to talk to female family practice residents. And he looked at me one day, he said, "Oh, you're alone today." And he said, when you're sitting here in this decaying corpse of a body, you have time to reflect and regret. And the piece of advice I'm going to give you is if you ever have the opportunity to make love to a beautiful woman, do it, because you will always regret not having done so. So that was his pearl of wisdom. And the ROM exhibit helped raise awareness about our program, and I know I need to speed up. We took care of Barbara and her husband, and Joyce, who was cognitively impaired but could go out, but didn't know what day it was. She used to walk from where she lived to the Yonge and Eglinton Center, which was quite a hike. She wouldn't take the subway because she didn't know where to get off. And she didn't know how to get home on the subway, but if she walked, she could find her way. And she did very well going to the adult day program, and eventually moved into a supportive housing facility for cognitively impaired seniors and lived very well there for a couple of years. The reason she's bruised is she went out during a snowstorm and slipped and fell and smashed her face. And there she is with our social worker. And here she is at Ewart Angus Homes, which is the supportive housing facility I mentioned. And there she is as a young woman. And there she is at the adult day program with a volunteer who happens to be my daughter. John shuffled into an emergency department complaining of leg pain and was referred to us. And our OT went in, and this is what she found. So you think this is hoarding, but wait a minute. There are, you can barely see, they're neatly coiled bits of rope. There are 3 Javex bottles in a row. And when I walked in, I go, this sort of looks like a fort, because there were passageways, and it wasn't chaos, it was organized. It was like he built this neat fort. And so I asked him, what did you used to do? And anyways, he was a Korean War veteran. And I said, what did you do? And he said, you know, what was your role in the war? He said, I held the line. So he was in the front row trenches, in the front lines. And he said, if they come in and take off their boots, I'll hear the crinkle of the cardboard. He was having flashbacks. He was cognitively impaired, and he was having flashbacks to the war and you know, post-traumatic stress, and had built this defensive fort. And what was, I think, and the man was very socially isolated, had no family, no television, no radio, no telephone. So he couldn't buzz us in. And his fridge only had water bottles and empty muffin containers. He was buying muffins at the supermarket downstairs. And this building is where he lived, and it's right next to, it's at Yonge and Eglinton, right in the heart of the biggest, wealthiest city in the country. And he had heart disease and had some mini strokes from little blood clots firing off into his brain. It was just ironic that he was living in the shadow of the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So there, you know, 2 Mercedeses fighting for the parking spot that my tripod is taking up. So we sent in Extreme Clean. We brought it up with John, and John said, bulldoze it all into Lake Ontario. See, hoarders, you've got to really negotiate. And with John, it wasn't, because it wasn't hoarding, it was his fort. And he was happy to get rid of the fort, and that's the exact same scene after Extreme Clean. And he did very well for a couple of years, and he became much more verbal by interacting with others, and he had two good years, and then he had a massive stroke and died, and was buried. The monument in the background, the sort of pyramidal model, is the National Korean War Memorial, just outside of Toronto. And the Lieutenant Governor visited the exhibit, and that prompted the Health Minister to come and visit us at Sprint and learn about home care and home-based primary care. And I'm going to motor through. We started to work collaboratively with Mount Sinai when Dr. Sinha appeared on the scene in 2010. And there we are doing a joint home visit. We do joint home visits, so the specialist is doing the assessment with the family doctor, so that, you know, he comes up with suggestions, and, well, we tried that. Well, we tried that. Well, we tried that. So it makes his job both harder and more satisfying, because he has to outsmart us. and we're pretty smart. So Mr. W had been hospitalized, which is actually how we started working with Dr. Sinha. And he had his follow-up assessment at home. And if any of you have seen Dr. Sinha speak, he's a man, it's very hard to get a word in edgewise. He has a lot to say, and I mean that in the kindest way. But who's doing the talking here? Mr. W. And our partnership generated some interest in the press, and the Globe and Mail did a very nice story about the model of care in 2011, and Zoomer magazine, and Barbara had a comprehensive geriatric assessment at home, and she continued to do very, very well. And in 2011, we took someone on a house call, and you see her right next to Barbara, was then Health Minister Deb Matthews, who wanted to make some announcements around home care and doctors' house calls, and made a promise that house calls for seniors would come back. And here she is talking to Barbara's son and daughter-in-law. And 3 weeks earlier, Dr. Hynek had joined the team. So this was the second doctor to join the team. So I said, you got to come. I know it's Sunday morning, but you got to come meet the health minister and tell her why you decided to become a home care physician. And this, of course, generated some press. This is Dr. Sabrina Akhtar, who did three placements with our team, and then started her own home-based primary care team out of Toronto Western Hospital. We participated in the process of doing a large-scale trial on the effectiveness of home-based primary care, and a lot of Minister Matthews decided to make the whole issue of care at home a pillar of Ontario's action plan for healthcare, and to bring back house calls and expand home-based care, and committed to forming a senior strategy. And she visited Dr. Sinha and the acute care for elders unit. And the gentleman standing back there is Bruce Leff. He's a geriatrician at Johns Hopkins who happened to be visiting to give a talk. And we had a quote from him at the very beginning of this talk. And she announced that Dr. Sinha would be the expert lead for Ontario's senior strategy. And a few weeks later, she went on another house call and visited this gentleman who had just been discharged from hospital. And she made the announcement about rapid response nurses coming into the system. And we attracted some charitable dollars from the Green Shield Canada Foundation, which allowed our team to grow. We grew our rehab component. A third physician joined the team. In December of 2012, the senior strategy was submitted, and Mr. W was continuing to age with grace. And the Premier came and announced some significant home care funding, $280 million in spring of 2013. A new model of care which makes it possible to do this kind of work, what's called an alternative funding plan. So instead of being paid on a piecework basis, one receives a sort of salary for taking care of a certain number of seniors. And that's what has made it possible for our team to grow to 4 physicians. And Deb Matthews continued to promote the idea of expanding home care for seniors. Our catchment area now covers about half of the city of Toronto. So we go from roughly the Don Valley to almost the Junction. So it's still not the whole city, but we're a small team. And our biggest issue is we receive $480,000 a year from the Toronto Central LHIN. That's the same budget we were given in 2009 for a team built around 1 physician and an annual caseload of 135. And now our annual caseload is 500 patients per year. And we really need double the funding that we're getting. And if anyone would like to give us a $10 million endowment, we'd be very grateful. And though our program being successful and cost effective, I think innovative programs that don't fit into current practice or funding models have a challenge. You know, you're a square peg in a round hole, or whatever the expression is. And I think more importantly, a program like HouseCalls challenges the status quo, and systems are very entrenched in maintaining the status quo, and entrenched interests are invested in maintaining the status quo. We all struggle with that. I was in Florence last year, and I wanted to visit Santa Croce. And Santa Croce is not the most important church in Florence. It's not the biggest, it's not the fanciest, but a number of notable people are buried here. Rossini, the opera composer, is buried here. Marconi of radio fame is buried here. Galileo Galilei, the astronomer, is buried here. Michelangelo is buried here. And so is Machiavelli. And Machiavelli wrote The Prince, which is his treatise on how to wield power ruthlessly and expediently. And I think we could all learn from Machiavelli about how to do advocacy as opposed to activism. And to paraphrase Machiavelli very liberally, or taking great exception, those of us who are less powerful can influence those with more power by making it politically expedient to do the right thing. And this is the essence of advocacy. So I wanted to pay homage to Machiavelli's role in this whole journey. So I have some parting thoughts. There are two entry points into the healthcare system today: emergency rooms and hospitals, you know, outpatient clinics and medical offices. But what about your home? Shouldn't home care and home-based primary care and palliative care at home all be entry points into the healthcare system, especially with our aging demographic? And the question I leave you with is, where and how do you want to live out your days? And does our current system look like it's going to make that possible or not? Thank you very much.
Dr. Mark, my name is Don Benwell. I'm the treasurer. I've been listening to this presentation and literally overwhelmed with it. Dr. Mark, you truly are a doctor of the people. That's the only way to describe it. We appreciate you being here tonight, and you will give us all something to take back and think about. I'd like to invite Allison Price. Allison is the director of our in-home services with a special presentation for you. Now you're going to have to watch some of the calories on this. Are loaded. Wow. And handmade, particularly for you. Oh my God. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Spence. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Links2Care, and I'm a little disappointed I can't give you a long, complex, and what I would think would be fascinating financial presentation. Instead, I'd just like to thank you all very much for coming. I'd like you to reflect upon the words of Dr. Mark Nowaczynski and think of ways that we can all work together for the seniors in our community, which we're all rapidly approaching. So thank you all very much and good night.